All right, so I got a little bit of a lecture. I got a short lecture today, and then we'll do the students that are interested in doing an early presentation. So we're here at 160. And right here. So I'll talk a little bit about the risk management life cycle, and then we will have people who wish to present their presentation early. And next week, I'll be all presentations, and I won't have any lecture because it'll probably fill up all the time. All right, so let's start with this 160 stuff here. All right, so we're doing part 2 here, part of the risk management life cycle, and there's more of it coming next time. So this is the iterative process to determine what risk is tolerable, analyze your risks, measure how much you succeeded in mitigating the risks, and then go around in a loop, improving your plans. And so there's quite a bit to it. You determine the scope of your risk management plan, the roles and responsibilities of the people, the workflow, the rules, and the records created. There are several frameworks and standards being used out there. So here's the general life cycle. First, you determine the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. Then you identify what the risks are. Then you analyze them to decide, including the value of your asset and how much risk you're willing to tolerate. You decide what risks you have and what would be good to do about them. And then you implement treatments to lower the risks that are worth lowering, and you choose to accept the risks that would be more expensive to reduce than it is to just let them happen. And then you do a risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, and so on, to determine how much risk you have left and decide to what extent your treatment has been successful. And then you return back to identifying the remaining risks and deciding which ones of them need treatment, and you just go around and around and around forever, presumably constantly improving your risk mitigation. So that's it. You define your scope, your asset valuation, and identify your risks, analyze them, considering how likely the thing is to occur, how much harm it would cause if it did occur, and that guides you for what kind of mitigation is appropriate. And here's the 4 treatments. You can just accept a risk, do not implement any control, just let it happen because it doesn't matter very much. Like your employees will probably make personal copies on the copy machine, and who cares? It's better to just let them do it than bother to spend money preventing it. You can mitigate it by implementing some kind of control to lower the risk. You can transfer it to somebody else by outsourcing a business process or purchasing insurance. Or you can avoid it, the most drastic one, where you change your operations so you no longer perform the risky activity at all. And then you have to communicate what you've done. Risk avoidance, extreme cases, for example, in California, PG&E was held liable for starting huge fires. So after that, they started just turning off the power whenever there was periods of high wind and such, so that their power lines couldn't cause a fire. And that's one way to prevent a risk. That's called risk avoidance. You simply stop providing service so those people don't have any power, but then you can't be blamed for fires that start. So that is a really drastic risk treatment. All right. And so you keep a risk register, a list of your risks with the description of them, the risk treatment decisions, and that it guides what you're doing. The first lecture you said for APTs, the best you can do is layer your security. Yes, absolutely. That's the point of APTs. And many modern security threats. The point is we've all learned, starting about a decade ago, that you cannot prevent attacks. You can only prevent some of the attacks, and some of them are going to get through. So you can't have a perimeter defense like a firewall and believe that everything inside there is clean. Instead, you have to have detection and incident response and network monitoring and layers of defenses, because in reality you have a zero trust system where none of your systems are completely clean. And the opposite of the old model where you have a perimeter and you trust everything inside the perimeter is the new model we're all going towards, zero trust, which is right now in its infancy, but that's where we're all headed, where you test things before trusting them throughout the system. Good. Let's take a look at a Kahoot. 3B1, library favorites. And 160 3B1. There we go. Looks pretty good. Good. It's showing you the questions and answers. That's good. Okay, and so it goes up here. Okay. All right. Oh, very few people today. All right. The 6 is probably all I'm going to get then. All right. All right. All right, so what's the first step in risk management? Yep, you start by determining the scope. What part of your company is going to be affected by the program? All right, if you have a high probability and a low impact, what should you do? Those you accept, things that are very likely to happen and don't hurt you very much. It's better to just let them happen instead of wasting a lot of time and energy trying to prevent them. All right, Dick's was a sporting goods store, and they decided they didn't want to sell rifles anymore for fear that they would be used for mass shooting or something. They just destroyed the rifles. So what kind of risk treatment is that? I think they did that a couple years ago after a big notorious school shooting. They said, you know, we're just getting out of this business. That's risk avoidance. They say, we're not going to do this business anymore. It's just too risky. All right. All right. So which one is the list of risks and treatments? All right, that's the risk ledger. Risk analysis would apply just to one, but the risk ledger is the list of all your previous risks and the treatments you applied. All right. So, TDD, I don't know who that is. I guess they don't care. That's a name I can use. And that's a name I can use. All right, good. So let's look at a few of these programs, these frameworks. All right, here's some of the risk management methodologies. You got the ones from the National Institute of Standards for the American government. You got 839 and 830 special publications. 830 is how to perform risk assessments, and 839 is how to organize your security risk treatment program from a management point of view. So this is the larger, someone DM'd me. Oh, okay. Yes, yeah, good you tell me, because I often don't notice anything like that. And somehow it won't open. There it opens. Ah, somebody telling me who DDD is. Oh, good. Good, okay, good. Good. Good, and I saw you yesterday, too. That's good to know. All right, thank you. Okay, so anyway, All right, then there's the international standard, ISO IEC, one of the 27,000 ones, and then another one called FAIR. These all are ways to organize your risk management program. So this is the 39 one. Right, 39 is the big management one. 30 is the more specific one just for risk assessments. The bigger number is the bigger scale in this case. All right, so this is the multi-level risk management system. It's got 3 levels: information systems level, your computers and stuff, mission and business process level, which would be one particular process, like say the manufacturing your product, as opposed to sales, marketing, HR, and things like that, and then the overall organizational level. So you have 3 levels of at which you can consider risks, and you communicate the risks upward towards management, and then decisions are communicated downward. So each one of these have some way of measuring what the problems are. You send the information about the problems up, and then the management sends out decisions and policies and such, which hopefully mitigate the problem. That's the plan. That's the big structure of NIST 839. So the organization view is governance. The mission is about the security architecture and business processes. And down here in information system, you've got things like vulnerability management and the system development's life cycle and so on. Details of exactly how you build your information systems and maintain them. So you have risk framing, then you have assessment, response, and then monitoring. So you can see the words are a little different, but the general idea is always the same. Now, the risk assessment itself, which is a small part of the previous one. Remember, back here, risk assessment was just step 2 of this 839 process. And you have another NIST special publication just to explain how to do a risk assessment. So, this is a standard methodology, and it gives you a bunch of worksheets helping you record your threats and vulnerabilities, the probability of occurrence, and the impact. So first you prepare for assessment, determining the scope and purpose, and where you're going to get threat information. We've talked about, in other classes, I guess I've talked about threat intelligence feeds. Like people asked before class in the news, is Russia attacking us? And we all got warnings from the federal government, CISA, last week. Everybody in America should prepare for attacks because we do expect Russia to attack us. If you're anybody important, critical national infrastructure or anything, you should be taking protective measures. By the way, Nicole Perwath pointed out, the Russian government servers have all gone dark. And at first people thought they were down, but then they determined what they have done is they have put them all behind a firewall which blocks all traffic outside Russia, or in a VPN or something. So that is probably a protective measure to make sure that they will be protected from attacks from outside Russia, which is certainly what you can expect from activists and angry people. And now Ukraine has asked their hackers to attack Russia. So they have apparently taken the proactive step of blocking all traffic from outside Russia, which is probably a pretty good way to protect themselves. So you've got these lists of threat source inputs and adversary capabilities and threat events and so on. And by the way, not everything bad is a deliberate person attacking you. There's things that are sort of acts of God, like earthquakes and fires and floods, but they're still threats. So you identify your threat sources. Then you identify your vulnerabilities and predisposing conditions, and you have a severity scale of these things. And I did not understand what a predisposing condition was, so I actually went and looked up the tables. This is all online. These are not hidden behind a paywall or anything. You can just download the PDFs of these things. And here's part of what a predisposing condition is. The predisposing condition is something like how big the network is. A single user, networks, multi-user, restricted functionality, and sort of like what Russia did. What they did by blocking all traffic outside the country is they lowered a risk, and that's what I would think is a predisposing condition. If you don't even provide service outside your country, then if you have like a CVE vulnerability with a score, it has a different meaning when you are in fact using a system that is very limited in who can use it. So this reminds me a lot of the classic thing we talked about before in the military, where you have clearance going up to top secret, and then you have need to know horizontally. So there's two measures of how many people could actually reach a system to hurt it, and that affects your threat surface and your risk. All right, then you got the likelihood of occurrence, figuring out how likely it is that the threat will initiate. Occurrence, likely that it will actually result in adverse impact. This is a very common thing you get in this business. Students will look at their firewall logs and they will freak out. Oh my God, we've been attacked 1,000 times yesterday because your firewall had something come in and reject it. And that's so that you could say a threat event happens very often, but those threat events are very weak and they're blocked by your firewall, so they don't actually have much impact. All right, so then the magnitude of the impact, determine how likely it is, how much harm it's likely to do to you. They just have examples to guide you here. And then you determine your risk. You take your risk, you have a scale, you fill out these columns and such just to sort of guide you into measuring risk. And then communicate the results, maintain the assessment, and monitor risk factors you're going to have to keep assessing as things change. All right, so that's the U.S. government system, NIST. Then there's the international system, ISO 27005. This is the international standard to doing the same thing, a structured approach to risk assessment and management. So first you establish the context, your scope criteria, your risk acceptance criteria, and your plan. Then you perform risk assessment, which is pretty much always the same. You identify your assets, then the threats, then you consider what controls there are and what vulnerabilities there are, and now you can judge the consequences of various threats. Then you have risk evaluation, and then risk treatment, which is the same old thing. You can do risk reduction, which is mitigation, where you do something to lower the risk. You can do risk acceptance, where you just let it happen, which they call retention. You can avoid it by changing your business so you no longer do the risky thing, or you can transfer the risk by somehow making it somebody else's problem. Orgs have people whose entire list of duties is to form these plans and see them through. Yes, they do. And this is mostly what managers do, is form these plans and go to meetings to plan them and communicate them. Yes. And if you want to meet a big standard like this, you have layers of management. That's why when I came from small business, I was just sort of horrified. A small business, everybody works. And when you get to be a big corporation, there's a whole bunch of managers that would never actually do the work. They just spend all their time filling out forms, making plans. But that's what you have to do when you're in the big leagues. All right, so to communicate it, you got announcements of upcoming assessments, information you collected, results of the previous ones, discussions of risk tolerance, educational information, updates on your mission objectives, and so on, and communication about security incidents. This is a really important one. If you do have a security incident, like some kind of breach, and then it gets in the paper, then you're going to have to communicate effectively. You're going to have to communicate to your customers, to your suppliers, to the agencies overseeing you, and you have to tell people what they need to know. There was an incident about 10 years ago at the college where a crooked CTO claimed that we had a huge virus infestation, which was not true. But he went straight to the paper and made an international scandal out of it. And the next day, people were calling me and all sorts of people saying, what should I do? Should I even come to work? Do I log into my machine? Do I need to get a new credit card? Do I need to change my password? What does this mean for me? And there was no information forthcoming from the guy that initiated this. And that is what you should not do. Right? When something happens that is a security incident, you should think of what everyone's going to ask. And everyone's going to ask, does this mean they got my credit card number? Does this mean I can't use my computer? Does this mean the building is not safe? They have very intelligent questions, and you have to communicate that to people. So, this was an example of doing everything wrong. And we eventually got rid of that guy. Anyway, so then you discover your assets and your changes in business practices and technology architecture and new threats. That's why you have to have this cycle, because everything keeps changing. New vulnerabilities, external factors change the probability of consequences. Like this week, suddenly an attack from Russia became much more likely than it was last week. And your security incidents may alter your organization's maturity level and so on. All these things are changing all the time, which is why you need this closed loop. All right, and then there's the FAIR system, just another way to do the same thing. So you find the factors that contribute to risk, the probability of occurrence, and an estimation of the loss. So there are 6 types of loss here. Productivity loss is your inability to produce your product because of the security problem. Then response, I don't quite understand what that is. Replacement, I understand. Replacing, I guess the cost of incident response itself. You're paying staff an hourly rate to run around analyzing logs and stuff. Then replacing equipment, fines and judgments, as you are sued and have to pay fines for having to fail to live up to your regulatory rules. Your loss of competitive advantage, if your competitors are seen as more secure or they get the next product out faster because you're behind, and the related thing, reputation, which is very hard to quantify. I've seen measurements down through the years of how much it's going to cost you to have a security breach that vary from like 20 cents per record to $200 per record, which is a really big range. It is not simple to say how much it would cost you if you get hacked. It's complicated. So here's things a threat agent might do. They might access an asset. They might misuse the asset, disclose it. That's the classic security breach where they take your private data and dump it on the web. They can modify it, or they can deny use of it. These are various bad things they could do, and you should consider the possibility of all these things and engage in appropriate risk treatments to deal with them. So, I got another Kahoot. 3B2. All right. Now I know who DDD is. This is good. All right. Percentage of the fine should be mandatory. Well, sure. And that's often the case in lawsuits. I've seen that. When you get sued, you settle, and then as a result, you have to improve your security practices and be audited every year for 10 years or something. That's the kind of thing you fairly commonly include in the lawsuit settlements. Another thing that would help, which is coming, is if you would buy cyber insurance, but your cyber insurance would say you must turn on these best practices to lower your rate. Well, I don't know. Lawsuits can be expensive. They can be less expensive. I mean, often you hire good lawyers and you win. So, yeah. Sometimes some lawsuits go on forever. Other lawsuits fail right away, and people don't get anything. It varies enormously. I used to do a lot of lawsuits. I've worked in an escrow agency, and some of them got off very easy, and some of them are monstrously big. It varies a lot. All right, let's do this. All right, what's the U.S. government standard for risk assessments? That's number 30. Good. All right. The NIST 30. All right. Which one has 6 types of loss? That was fair. All right. And what's the U.S. standard for risk management? All right. That's the 839. That's right. The higher number is the bigger scale. And which standard uses organization, mission, and information systems view? I think it's 839. Let's go back and take a look because I get a little confused. 839. There's a little triangular diagram up here. Yep, there it is. It was 839 with the 3 levels. Okay. Good. Yeah, you would think it would be this by process of elimination, but it was 839. All right. DDD, 1 twice, good. And Hadik, 1 again, good. And a new winner, all right. All right. So I'll stop the recording.